David Paulides has spent years documenting the mysterious disappearances that defy explanation. His books have brought to light countless chilling stories, each one more perplexing than the last. Today, we turn to one of these unsolved cases, a tale of disappearance and unanswered questions. The details may be familiar to those who've read his work, but the haunting mystery continues to linger. Barbara Bolick was no stranger to the outdoors. At 55 years old, she and her husband Jim lived in the small town of Corvallis, Montana, surrounded by the Bitterroot Mountains. It was a quiet life filled with nature, faith, and a deep sense of community. Those who knew Barbara described her as kind, grounded, and full of life. She was the sort of person who made people feel at ease, a warm presence. But on July 18, 2007, that warmth disappeared. The day began like many others. Barbara and Jim had a friend visiting from out of town, a man named Jim Ramaker. He was an old family friend, staying at their home for a few days. The two had made plans to go on a short hike together that afternoon. A casual walk up into the Blodgett Canyon, a place Barbara had visited dozens of times. It wasn't remote by Montana standards. A trail, well-worn and popular, stretched through the canyon and into the forested hills. No dangerous wildlife sightings had been reported that week. The weather was clear and pleasant. Everything about it felt routine. Barbara wore her hiking gear, light boots, khaki pants, a sleeveless blue top. No purse, no phone. Just a water bottle in hand. Her plan wasn't to be gone long. According to Jim Ramaker, the two drove up to the trailhead, parked, and started their hike just after 2 p.m. They moved slowly, taking in the views, talking, and snapping photos along the way. By all accounts, it was an easy, unremarkable walk. Until suddenly it wasn't. They had reached a scenic lookout point. Trees parted to reveal sweeping views of the canyon. Jim turned around to admire the view. He was only a few steps ahead of Barbara. He remembers hearing her behind him just moments before. But when he turned around again, she was gone. No sound, no rustling. No footsteps, just silence. At first, Jim thought she may have stepped off the trail, perhaps to use the restroom in the woods or to explore the rocks nearby. He called out to her. Nothing. He retraced his steps, checked the area surrounding the lookout, searched behind trees, and scanned the slope below. There was no sign of Barbara. He kept searching for over an hour. Then panic set in. He rushed back down the trail and drove straight to the Bolick home. Barbara's husband, Jim Bolick, immediately called the Ravalli County Sheriff's Office. A search party was organized within hours. By that evening, more than 50 people were scouring the area. Search and rescue teams, local volunteers, and law enforcement officers. Helicopters were dispatched to scan from above. Dogs were brought in to pick up a scent. But Barbara had vanished as if the forest had swallowed her whole. No signs of a struggle. No items left behind. No broken branches or drag marks. Even the search dogs came up empty. In the first 48 hours, authorities considered the usual possibilities. Could she have fallen from the lookout point? The cliffs were steep, but not dangerously so. They searched the rocky slopes and the ravines below. Nothing. Was it possible she had been attacked by an animal? Wildlife experts said no. There had been no recent predator sightings, no blood, no clothing torn or dragged. What about foul play? Could Jim Ramaker have done something? That question hovered in the air during the early days of the investigation. After all, Barbara was last seen with him. He had no injuries, no scratches, no torn clothing. His story never changed. And crucially, there was no evidence to suggest he was involved. Investigators interviewed him extensively and found no signs of deception. He passed a polygraph test. In the end, law enforcement said he was cooperative, calm, and genuinely shaken. Still, people couldn't help but wonder. You don't just vanish in broad daylight without a sound. The Bolick family struggled to accept the possibilities. Barbara's husband refused to believe she had simply wandered off or gotten lost. She was too experienced. The trail wasn't confusing. There were no forks or confusing markers. If anything, it was a place she felt at home. Friends and family described the days following her disappearance as surreal. Her toothbrush sat unused. Her coffee mug still in the sink. Her bed neatly made. And yet, she was gone. Rumors began to spread. Some wondered if she had staged her own disappearance, choosing to walk away from her life. But again, there was no motive. No signs of distress. No sudden changes in her behavior. Her marriage was stable. Her friendships were strong. Her bank accounts untouched. Then there was another theory. One that felt harder to believe, but equally hard to ignore. Could someone else have been on the trail that day? The Blodgett Canyon is a popular spot. Dozens of hikers pass through each day during the summer months. What if a stranger had crossed paths with Barbara in that brief window when she and Ramaker were apart? It would only have taken seconds. Law enforcement asked hikers to come forward. If anyone had been in the canyon that day, seen something, anything, they were urged to report it. A few people responded. Most had seen nothing unusual. But one man did come forward with something chilling. He claimed he had been hiking not far from the area where Barbara vanished. He hadn't seen her. But he had seen a man, alone, lingering just off the trail, acting strangely. He couldn't recall many details. No license plate. No name. But he said the man made him feel uneasy. That sighting, however vague, breathed new life into the theory that Barbara may have been abducted. But there was no proof. No camera footage. No witnesses to a struggle. Just a growing sense of unease. As the weeks passed, the search slowed. Fewer volunteers came out. Helicopters stopped flying. And yet, Jim Bollock never gave up. He kept her photo on his desk. He returned to the trail, alone again and again, hoping for anything. A piece of fabric. A shoe. A sign. Nothing ever came. Years went by. Her name faded from the headlines, but not from memory. Her family continued to search, quietly and steadily. Her church held vigils. Her face still on missing persons websites. And that trail in Blodgett Canyon? It's still open to the public. People hike it every day. Most don't know what happened there. They take in the view, breathe in the mountain air, and keep walking. But some stop. They linger at the overlook where Barbara Bollock was last seen. They look around, listen, and feel something. There's something about the wilderness that feels eternal. The mountains don't move. The trees don't speak. But every so often, someone disappears into the silence, and nothing ever comes back. In the summer of 1981, a teenage girl stepped away from a group in one of America's most visited national parks. The walk she took wasn't far. She was still within sight of others. But she never returned. And no one could explain why. It happened in Yosemite. The girl wasn't alone. She had come to the park with her father and several others, part of a guided trip through the high country. It was supposed to be peaceful. Just horses, fresh air, and a break from the noise of life. That afternoon, the group had arrived at a backcountry camp, one of those scenic, high-elevation spots built for travelers to rest before continuing on the trail. They unpacked their bags, tied the horses, and settled in for the night. The girl was just 14 years old. Young, but not reckless. She changed clothes after the long ride and told her father she was going to take a short walk to stretch her legs. There was a small lake nearby, only about 100 yards from camp. She wasn't going far. Just a quick walk. She even had company, an older man from the group who said he'd tag along. They set off down the path together. A few moments later, one of the campers looked toward the lake and saw the girl crouched near a rock, adjusting her camera. The man who'd walked with her had stopped earlier to rest. She'd gone on ahead alone. And then she was gone. Completely. No one heard a scream. No one saw a struggle. The spot where she'd been just seconds earlier was now empty. At first, the others weren't worried. She'd probably taken the long way around, or wandered off a little farther than expected. Her father started calling her name, then searching the path, then walking the perimeter of the lake. But she didn't come back. As daylight began to fade, panic set in. Park rangers were notified, and a search team was assembled. Dogs, helicopters, expert trackers, they all combed the area. The terrain was open. Visibility was good. There were no cliffs. No thick forest. She had been right there in broad daylight. Searchers found nothing. There were no signs of an animal attack. No torn clothing. No blood. Her camera was missing. Her scent trail, faint at best, seemed to lead toward a ridge before vanishing entirely. They searched for 9 straight days. Hundreds of people. Nothing. The girl's name was Stacy Arris. She hadn't taken any supplies. She wasn't carrying food or water. Her bag was still in the cabin. She had no reason to run away, and she wasn't the type to take risks. Everything about her disappearance defied logic. There were no strangers in the area. Everyone in the group had been accounted for. Yet somehow, a 14-year-old girl vanished just a stone's throw from camp, and not a single clue was left behind. Some have tried to explain it. Maybe she got disoriented. Maybe she fell into a hidden crevice. Maybe. But the search was thorough. The lake was checked. The surrounding trails were covered over and over. Others think something or someone took her. But no one saw or heard anything. There were no signs of a struggle. No footprints leading away. It was as if the wilderness had simply opened up and swallowed her whole. Years went by. Stacy's father kept coming back to Yosemite, hoping for answers. He put up flyers. He walked the trails again and again. But no trace of Stacy Arris has ever been found. To this day, hikers still pass through that same camp. The rocks haven't moved. The lake hasn't changed. The path she walked still leads down from the cabins, and then disappears into silence. Whatever happened that day in August 1981 remains one of Yosemite's most haunting mysteries. There's something about the mountains that draws people in. For some, they offer peace, a place to breathe, to reflect, to heal. For Mary Lucille Sloan, the wilderness was all of that, and more. But in 2015, a peaceful hike through those same woods would end in silence, and a mystery that still hasn't been solved. Mary was 62 years old when she disappeared. She had recently lost her husband and was dealing with the heavy weight of grief. After a lifetime spent with him, their home in Michigan had grown unbearably quiet. Hoping to find clarity, and perhaps a little bit of healing, Mary decided to take a trip west. She'd always loved the mountains and had visited Colorado several times over the years. This time, she planned to hike alone. Mary was described as independent and strong-willed. Friends say she wasn't reckless, but she wasn't the type to be held back by fear either. She knew how to take care of herself. She'd done solo hikes before, always prepared, always cautious. So when she told her daughter that she was heading to the Holy Cross Wilderness in Eagle County, Colorado, no one was especially worried. She arrived at the small mountain town of Minturn in mid-July 2015. It was quiet, remote, and surrounded by towering peaks and dense forests. Perfect for what Mary needed, a chance to be alone in nature. She checked into a small motel, spent the evening looking at trail maps, and told the front desk clerk she planned to hike part of the Fall Creek Trail the next day. On the morning of July 15th, Mary packed her gear and drove to the trailhead. She left her car parked neatly off the road and began her hike. That was the last time anyone saw her. When Mary didn't return that evening, there was an immediate concern. She was known to take her time on trails, sometimes hiking longer than expected. But when her car remained untouched for 2 days, local authorities were alerted. The Eagle County Sheriff's Office launched a search and rescue mission on July 17th. Dozens of volunteers joined deputies, scouring the Fall Creek Trail and surrounding areas. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs were brought in to pick up her scent. But the forest was dense and the terrain unforgiving. Searchers found no trace of Mary. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a single item from her gear. Her car was exactly as she left it, locked, undisturbed, with all her personal belongings inside. Her phone had been left behind, something her daughter found troubling. Mary usually carried it on hikes, even if the reception was spotty. As days passed and no sign of her emerged, the search area widened. Investigators began to wonder if she had taken a wrong turn, or if something more sinister had happened. The Fall Creek Trail is known for its beauty, but also for its isolation. In certain stretches, hikers can go hours without seeing another soul. That isolation makes it perfect for those seeking solitude. But it also means that if something goes wrong, help can be far away. Some believed Mary may have fallen. A twisted ankle, a bad step near a steep drop, or even an animal encounter. Those were all possibilities. But typically, in cases like that, some trace is left behind. A backpack, a hiking stick, torn fabric. But with Mary, nothing. Others suspected she may have chosen to disappear. That perhaps her grief had become too much and she wanted to leave everything behind. But her family rejected that theory. Mary had made plans to return home, had left her things in order, and had even talked about seeing her grandchildren when she got back. There were no signs that she intended to vanish. As the investigation continued, rumors began to swirl. Some locals mentioned a man who had been camping illegally in the area, someone known to make hikers uncomfortable. Others brought up stories of drifters and off-grid wanderers living deep in the wilderness. But authorities never confirmed any credible suspect. One of the only solid leads came from a pair of hikers who claimed to have seen a woman matching Mary's description near a ridge several miles off the main trail. They said she seemed disoriented and alone. But their account couldn't be verified, and by the time search teams reached that area, the trail had gone cold. Weeks turned into months. Snow began to fall. The search officially ended in late September 2015, though volunteers continued to check remote areas on their own well into the winter. Mary Lucille Sloan was never found. No remains. No belongings. Nothing. Her disappearance remains one of Colorado's most haunting unsolved mysteries. A woman looking for peace, swallowed by the very wilderness she loved. On a warm September afternoon in 1981, 3 women were hiking through the Smoky Mountains in North Carolina. The group was familiar with the trail. It was a peaceful walk they often took together to escape daily life. But on this particular day, something felt different. Midway through the hike, 58-year-old Polly Melton, the tallest and most robust of the 3, suddenly picked up her pace, walked ahead of the group, and disappeared around a bend. Her friends weren't alarmed at first. Polly had done this before. She liked her space and sometimes enjoyed a bit of solitude on the trail. But when they reached the end of the path and she was nowhere in sight, they knew something was wrong. To understand this strange case, we need to talk about Polly herself. Polly was a 58-year-old woman living in the town of Jacksonville, Florida, but she frequently spent her summers in the Smoky Mountains with her husband. Described by friends as generous and kind-hearted, Polly volunteered regularly at a local senior center in North Carolina and was well-liked by the community. She had a warm personality, a deep Southern charm, and carried herself with quiet confidence. Polly had been married twice. Her first husband passed away, and she later remarried a man named Bob Melton, a retired factory worker who had health issues. At the time of her disappearance, Bob was back home in Florida recovering from heart surgery, while Polly was spending the summer alone in their trailer in the Deep Creek area near Bryson City, North Carolina. Her life seemed pretty ordinary. Stable marriage, routine habits, familiar friends. But when she vanished, investigators quickly learned that Polly might have been hiding more than she let on. September 25, 1981 started like any other. Polly joined her 2 friends, as she often did, for a walk through the Deep Creek Trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It was a scenic area, quiet, safe, and lined with trees just beginning to turn color for the fall. At some point during the hike, Polly seemed distracted. Her friends later reported that she had been acting strangely, quieter than usual, a bit preoccupied. Then, somewhere about halfway through the walk, Polly suddenly started walking faster. She told her friends she was heading back and sped up until she was out of sight. When the other 2 women reached the end of the trail, about 10 minutes behind her, Polly wasn't there. They waited, thinking she may have taken a break or wandered to another spot. But there was no sign of her. Eventually, they returned to the trailer park and called authorities. Within hours, park rangers, police officers, and local volunteers began a search of the trail and surrounding woods. Dogs were brought in to pick up her scent. Helicopters combed the area from above, and search parties worked tirelessly for days. But nothing was found. No torn clothing. No footprints. No sign of struggle. It was as if Polly had evaporated into the air. Authorities were baffled. The terrain wasn't especially dangerous, and Polly knew the area well. She had hiked that trail countless times. And even more bizarre, she was a heavy smoker with a heart condition and wasn't in the best physical shape. It was unlikely she'd been able to move too far off trail by herself. So how could she have disappeared so completely? Initially, authorities considered several possibilities. The first was the most obvious, that Polly had gotten lost. Maybe she'd taken a wrong turn, fallen, or suffered a medical emergency. But there was no evidence to support this. The trail wasn't confusing, and Polly was known to stick to the path. Then there was the theory that she had been attacked or abducted. But there were no witnesses. No signs of a struggle. Nothing at all that pointed to foul play. But as investigators began digging into Polly's life, things got stranger. It turned out that in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Polly's behavior had changed dramatically. She had lost about 20 pounds. She started wearing makeup and dressing more carefully, something she hadn't done in years. She began receiving more mail than usual and made frequent trips to the post office. Always alone, always secretive. And perhaps most suspicious of all, just days before her disappearance, Polly transferred a large sum of money out of her joint bank account with Bob. It's not clear where the money went, but it was never recovered. There were also reports that she had been corresponding with a man via letters, someone she may have met at the senior center. Friends described Polly as restless, even agitated in the days before she vanished. Some speculated she had fallen in love with this man and was planning to leave her life behind. But if that was the case, why vanish into the woods? There's one more twist in this story, and it came from a local witness. A man working at a nearby campground reported seeing Polly shortly after her friends said she disappeared. He claimed she walked calmly out of the woods and got into a green sedan with an out-of-state license plate. But the sighting was never confirmed, and no one else recalled seeing the vehicle. The lead was weak, but it added fuel to the theory that Polly had orchestrated her own disappearance. The car theory was supported by one other small detail. Polly didn't take any personal items with her on the hike that day. No purse. No cigarettes. No ID. Nothing but the clothes on her back. It was almost as if she knew she wouldn't need them anymore. Bob Melton, Polly's husband, was devastated by her disappearance. He returned to North Carolina and assisted in the search. But as the years passed with no sign of Polly, questions were raised about what he really knew. There's no evidence Bob was involved, and no charges were ever brought against him. He remained in Jacksonville and passed away in the 2000s without ever learning what happened to his wife. But one question has lingered. Did Polly leave Bob willingly, or was there more to their relationship than outsiders knew? Despite extensive investigation, there are still so many unknowns in the case. Did Polly simply decide to disappear? Was she lured away by someone she trusted? Was foul play involved? It's worth noting that no activity was ever detected on her social security number. No bank records. No driver's license renewals. Nothing. If Polly left to start a new life, she managed to do it completely under the radar, which is incredibly rare, especially for someone in their late 50s. And despite renewed interest in the case over the years, no physical evidence has ever surfaced. The disappearance of Polly Melton remains one of the most baffling unsolved cases in North Carolina history. There was no body, no clear motive, no farewell note. Just a woman who walked into the woods and never came back. Sometimes the places meant to keep us safe are the very places we vanish without a trace. This is the story of Stephanie Stewart, a woman who dedicated her life to protecting the wilderness, only to disappear into it. Stephanie Stewart always kept a tight routine. At 70 years old, she had long since mastered the rhythm of her days as a fire lookout, stationed deep in the wilderness of Alberta, Canada. She lived alone in the Athabasca Valley, at a remote fire tower called the Athabasca Lookout, surrounded by thick forest and mountain air, miles from the nearest paved road. It was quiet, isolated, and beautiful. It was also the last place anyone saw her. On the morning of August 26, 2006, officials from Alberta Sustainable Resource Development noticed something was off. Stephanie hadn't checked in as she was supposed to. Daily radio contact was required for fire lookouts, especially during wildfire season, and she'd never missed a check-in before. Rangers were sent out to the lookout cabin to see what was going on. When they arrived, Stephanie wasn't there. The front door was open. The radio was on, but there was no sign of Stephanie herself. What they did find were subtle but disturbing details. A pot of water left boiling on the stove. Her bedding tossed and rumpled. Her vehicle still parked outside. And then, just behind the cabin, near the fire pit, something far more troubling. A pool of blood on the ground. At that moment, what was once a simple welfare check shifted instantly into something darker. Stephanie was known as responsible and alert. She was healthy, sharp-minded, and deeply experienced in backcountry life. She had worked as a fire spotter for several seasons and lived alone at the tower each summer. This wasn't someone who wandered off or got lost in the woods. Within hours, a major search was launched. Police, volunteers, tracking dogs, helicopters, every available resource was called in. They scoured the woods around the lookout. Nearby trails, rivers, ridgelines, even wildlife paths were checked. But there was no trace of Stephanie. Investigators took a closer look at the bloodstains near the fire pit. There was enough to suggest an injury, possibly a fatal one. Later testing confirmed the blood belonged to Stephanie. A bloody tissue was also found near the scene. More tests confirmed that too was hers. But nothing else pointed to what happened, or who might have done it. Her family and colleagues were stunned. Stephanie was gentle, compassionate, and always cautious. She had lived in Alberta for decades, raised children, and found joy in nature. She'd taken the fire lookout position after her children were grown, seeking peace and independence. She enjoyed solitude, but she wasn't careless. Everyone who knew her agreed. This wasn't a random accident. One theory that emerged early was that perhaps she'd encountered someone on the trails, a hiker, maybe a hunter, who meant harm. But that seemed unlikely. The area around the lookout wasn't exactly a popular hiking destination. It was rugged terrain with limited road access. You had to know where you were going. And even if someone did show up unexpectedly, Stephanie had a working radio and an ATV. She could have called for help or driven away. Another possibility investigators explored was that someone knew she'd be isolated, that it wasn't random at all. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police were tight-lipped about much of the early investigation, but a few key facts eventually came out. For one, there was no sign of a struggle inside the cabin. Whatever happened to Stephanie, it likely occurred outside. And second, there were no signs of robbery. Her personal belongings, wallet, radio, keys, were untouched. Nothing of value appeared to be missing. If this was an attack, it wasn't for money. Then came the twist that, for a moment, seemed like it could blow the case open. In 2010, 4 years after Stephanie vanished, authorities received a tip from a woman who claimed her husband had confessed to killing Stephanie during a psychotic episode. According to her, the man was abusive and violent, and during one of their arguments, he blurted out something about being involved in Stephanie's disappearance. The man lived in Alberta and had spent time near Jasper National Park. Police looked into it. They interviewed the man, searched his property, and investigated his background. But they couldn't find enough to make charges stick. His story was inconsistent. No physical evidence tied him to the lookout tower. And ultimately, the RCMP determined there wasn't sufficient cause to move forward. The tip was shelved. The man was never officially named a suspect. Years passed, and the case grew colder. Stephanie's daughter, Shannon, refused to let her mother's story fade. She kept in close contact with investigators, gave interviews, and pushed for answers. Stephanie's family was heartbroken, but they held on to hope. Not necessarily that she was still alive, but that someone somewhere would come forward with the truth. In 2017, over a decade after Stephanie went missing, the RCMP made a rare announcement. They officially declared her case a homicide. Until that point, they had referred to her as a missing person. But now they were confident she had been murdered. This wasn't a symbolic change. Investigators said they had new evidence, details they couldn't share publicly, that led them to believe Stephanie's death was intentional. They still didn't name a suspect, but they strongly hinted that they had someone in mind. And they issued a fresh appeal to the public. If anyone had been near the Athabasca Fire lookout around late August 2006, or had heard someone talk about the case in suspicious terms, they were urged to come forward. Despite the renewed attention, no arrests were made. Over the years, many in the tight-knit fire lookout community have speculated about what could have happened. Some believe Stephanie may have encountered someone living off-grid in the area, someone trying to stay hidden who saw her as a threat. Others suspect a passerby, someone who knew about the remoteness of the lookout tower and thought they could get away with violence in a place with no witnesses. There's also the unsettling possibility that her killer was someone she knew. Someone who knew her routine, knew where she'd be, and planned accordingly. One detail that still haunts those close to the case is the tissue with Stephanie's blood on it. The tissue was not something normally found at the lookout site. It suggested someone tried in some small way to clean up after an injury, or perhaps cover something up. But there were no footprints, no tire tracks, no weapons, and no body. Just silence. The forest around the Athabasca Fire lookout has grown denser since Stephanie disappeared. The site has long since been shut down. The lookout tower, once manned and maintained, now stands empty, weather-beaten and overgrown. But the memory of what happened there still lingers. Stephanie Stewart was more than just a fire spotter. She was a mother, a grandmother, and a woman who valued peace. The sun was setting at Hellroaring Creek Trailhead on April 4th, 1991. Daniel Lynn Campbell took one last look at the parking area as he adjusted his small backpack. His Australian Shepherd dog waited eagerly at his side, tail wagging. A friend had just dropped them off and was driving away. Neither Daniel nor his dog would ever be seen again. Daniel wasn't just visiting the wilderness, he belonged there. His hands were tough and weathered from years working as a logger and pole cutter. He could spot animal tracks that most people would walk right past. He moved through forests like he was part of them, comfortable in places that would make others nervous. But Daniel had secrets. According to his brothers, he wasn't in Yellowstone that day just to enjoy nature. He was there to collect shed antlers, illegal in national parks, planning to sell them for cash. He had set up a meeting in Jardine, a small town just outside the park, with people his brother would later describe as shady characters. Daniel carried very little gear that day, a choice that would soon prove deadly. When the sky turned angry. As Daniel and his dog walked deeper into the park, the weather was cool but pleasant, normal for early April in Yellowstone. The blue sky gave no hint that weather forecasters had been tracking a major storm system moving toward the area. By late afternoon, the first snowflakes began to fall. They were big and wet, melting when they hit the ground. Most hikers would have turned back then, sensing what was coming. But Daniel was miles from the trailhead, and he had a deal to make. He pressed on. Within hours, those gentle snowflakes turned into a raging blizzard. The wind screamed through the pine trees, driving snow sideways and making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The temperature dropped fast as darkness fell, turning the beautiful landscape into a killing zone. Daniel's light gear, chosen so he could carry more antlers, wasn't nearly enough protection against the storm's fury. The trail vanished under the snow. Landmarks disappeared in the whiteness. Even the shape of the land itself became impossible to make out as night came. These conditions can confuse even people who know the woods well. Snow changes how everything looks. Distances seem shorter, dangers are hidden, and the endless white plays tricks on your eyes when you're cold and tired. As the night grew colder, Daniel faced a deadly enemy, hypothermia. First would come the shivering, then confusion and bad decisions, and finally a strange feeling of warmth that tricks freezing people into thinking they're hot. Gone without a trace. For days passed before anyone reported Daniel missing. On April 8th, when he didn't show up at his meeting point in Jardine, someone finally called for help. By then, more snow had fallen. Any tracks that might have led rescuers to Daniel were buried deep. Park rangers quickly put together search teams, but they faced almost impossible odds. The storms had changed everything, covering miles of rough land and deep snow. Search dogs struggled to pick up Daniel's scent in the snow-filled air. Helicopters couldn't see much through the thick forest canopy. Days turned into weeks. Hope faded with each sunset. Despite the best efforts of professional rescuers and volunteers, they found nothing. Not a backpack, not a piece of clothing, not even a sign of Daniel's dog. It was as if they had simply disappeared from the earth. One search leader said, "In 25 years of finding lost people, I've never seen someone vanish so completely." What happened to Daniel? As the official search slowed down, questions grew. The news about Daniel's illegal antler collecting and his connections to shady characters opened up troubling possibilities. Was this just a case of bad weather and bad luck, or was something more sinister involved? The most likely explanation seems clear. Daniel, traveling with minimal gear and caught in a sudden, violent storm, couldn't survive the elements. Early April in Yellowstone is deceivingly dangerous. Winter isn't fully gone, but spring makes people less careful. Daniel's light pack suggests he wasn't ready for winter conditions. Wildlife could also be part of the story. April is when grizzly bears wake up from hibernation, hungry, protecting their cubs, and potentially dangerous. While Daniel knew how to avoid bears, the blinding snow could have led to a surprise encounter. The most disturbing theory involves foul play. Daniel's plan to sell illegally collected antlers points to a deal that might have gone wrong. His brother's comment about shady characters hints at dangerous connections. This might explain why no trace was ever found, not even of his loyal dog. What makes this case so haunting is the complete lack of evidence for any theory. No remains, no equipment, no signs of struggle, nothing to show what happened to Daniel or his faithful companion. This total emptiness continues to haunt investigators and family alike. Secrets of the Wilderness. Yellowstone National Park covers more than 2.2 million acres, an enormous area where someone could vanish and never be found. The land itself creates incredible challenges. Dense forests, steep mountains, remote valleys, hot springs, and countless hidden places where evidence could stay hidden for decades. On August 14, 2000, a traveler named Rupert came to Yosemite National Park with dreams of exploring its majestic wilderness. She had checked into Curry Village 3 days earlier, on August 11th. The front desk staff remembered her as friendly and enthusiastic, mentioning her plans for an extensive solo backpacking trip that would take her deep into Yosemite's backcountry. Rupert had reserved a canvas tent cabin, a simple but comfortable accommodation popular with hikers who wanted to immerse themselves in the park experience while still having basic amenities. Her reservation was for 7 nights, 3 nights to acclimate to the elevation and prepare, followed by what was supposed to be a 4-day backcountry expedition. Hotel records show that Rupert was meticulous in her planning. She had prepaid for her entire stay and left a credit card on file for incidentals. The registration form indicated she was traveling alone. In the emergency contact field, she had listed her sister's information. According to housekeeping logs, Rupert maintained an organized room. Her backpacking gear was neatly arranged: a high-quality backpack, sleeping bag rated for mountain conditions, portable stove, water purification system, and enough dehydrated meals for several days in the wilderness. Maps of the park were spread on the small table, with certain trails highlighted and notations made in the margins. On August 12th, Rupert had visited the front desk to inquire about trail conditions and weather forecasts. She mentioned her planned route, a challenging loop that would take her up past Nevada Falls, into Little Yosemite Valley, and eventually to Cloud's Rest before circling back. The desk clerk, an experienced hiker himself, had commended her research and preparation. That same day, Rupert had used the payphone in the main lodge to call her sister. The conversation was brief, but significant. Rupert mentioned feeling a bit under the weather, but was hoping it would pass quickly. She promised to check in again before heading into the backcountry. By August 13th, hotel staff noticed a change. Rupert visited the front desk again, this time asking for directions to the medical clinic. She appeared pale and was moving more slowly than before. When the clerk asked if she needed assistance, Rupert declined but mentioned she'd been experiencing nausea and dizziness since the previous evening, possible signs of altitude sickness. The night manager saw Rupert return to her cabin around 7 p.m. that evening. She was carrying a small white paper bag that appeared to be from the pharmacy. She looked tired but managed a smile when the manager asked if she was feeling better. "Just need some rest," she reportedly said. On the morning of August 14th, Rupert was seen at the camp dining area. She had a light breakfast, tea and toast according to the server who remembered her. She mentioned to a neighboring table that she had decided to postpone her backpacking trip, but was still planning to get some fresh air, with an easy day hike once she felt stronger. Rupert returned to her cabin after breakfast. The housekeeping staff observed her sorting through her gear around 10 a.m., separating a small day pack from her larger backpacking equipment. She declined room service, saying she would be out for a few hours. At approximately 11:30 a.m., Rupert was seen leaving her cabin. She wore hiking boots, lightweight pants, and a long-sleeved shirt despite the summer heat. Appropriate attire for someone still feeling under the weather but planning light outdoor activity. She carried a small day pack, presumably containing water, snacks, and basic supplies. The last confirmed sighting of Ruppert came at noon near the Yosemite Medical Clinic. Security footage briefly captured her walking alone on the path outside. Whether she was entering or leaving the clinic remains unclear from the footage. She appeared to be moving with purpose but not urgency. And then nothing. Ruppert never returned to her cabin. Her larger backpacking equipment remained exactly as she had left it that morning. Her wallet, containing identification and additional cash, was found in the cabin's small safe. Her rental car remained untouched in the parking area designated for Curry Village guests. The absence wasn't immediately noticed. It was only when housekeeping entered her cabin the following morning that concerns began to emerge. The bed had not been slept in. The medication from the pharmacy, later identified as standard treatment for altitude sickness, sat unopened on the nightstand. When Ruppert missed her scheduled call to her sister that evening, worry turned to alarm. Her family contacted the park, and rangers initiated a search, starting with the areas between Curry Village and the medical clinic, then expanding to nearby day hiking trails suitable for someone not feeling well. Yosemite's vast wilderness quickly became apparent in the search efforts. The park encompasses nearly 1,200 square miles of terrain, much of it rugged and remote. Despite an extensive search operation that lasted weeks and eventually involved multiple agencies, no trace of Ruppert was ever found. Her belongings at the cabin told the story of interrupted plans. The carefully packed backpacking gear she would never use, the journal containing excited notes about the vistas she hoped to see, the return plane ticket for a flight she would never board. The meticulous planning that had characterized her trip stood in stark contrast to her sudden and unexplained disappearance. For the loved ones left behind, Ruppert's disappearance created a wound that time cannot fully heal. Each holiday season brings an empty chair at the family table. Each birthday passes without celebration. Without definitive evidence of what happened, they exist in a painful limbo, unable to fully grieve yet forced to acknowledge the likelihood that answers may never come. Investigators explored multiple theories. Had Ruppert, despite being ill, attempted an unplanned hike and become disoriented? Had her symptoms worsened suddenly, causing her to wander off trail? Had she encountered wildlife or another park visitor with malicious intent? Each theory directed different search strategies, but none yielded results. Ruppert's case joined the unsettling statistics of people who have disappeared in America's national parks. Between 1980 and 2020, over 1,600 people went missing in these protected wilderness areas and were never found. While many disappearances have logical explanations, accidents, medical emergencies, or occasionally deliberate choices to disappear, others remain profound mysteries. Yosemite's rangers continue to carry the details of Ruppert's case, both as an open investigation and as a reminder of the park's dual nature. A place of incredible beauty that simultaneously harbors very real dangers. They know that the vast wilderness they patrol contains countless hiding places where evidence, or remains, could stay concealed indefinitely. In the years since that August day, search technologies have advanced. Thermal imaging has improved. Drone capabilities have expanded. But the fundamental challenge remains the same. Finding one person in an enormous wilderness where nature quickly reclaims all traces of human presence. On October 2, 2010, Patricia and Krieger embarked on a hike in the forests of southwest Washington state. At 65 years old, Patricia was an experienced hiker who found solace and meaning in the natural world. This particular journey held special significance. She was part of a group that had come to scatter the ashes of a loved one, a final farewell amid the towering trees and peaceful wilderness of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. The day began at the Cold Creek Trailhead near the small community of Yacolt, Washington. Patricia set out with her hiking companions, including members of her family and friends who had gathered for this solemn occasion. The trail they chose would take them through dense forest, climbing steadily in elevation with occasional views of the surrounding mountains. Patricia was well prepared for the day's journey. She wore appropriate hiking attire and carried a small pack with water and basic supplies. Though 65, she was described by those who knew her as energetic and capable on the trails, someone who had spent many years exploring the Pacific Northwest's wilderness areas. The group hiked together until they reached their destination, a scenic spot chosen for the ash scattering ceremony. After this emotional moment of remembrance and closure, the hikers began their return journey. It was during this return trip, somewhere along the wooded trail, that Patricia became separated from the group. The exact circumstances of the separation remain unclear. Some accounts suggest Patricia may have stopped to rest while others continued, intending to catch up shortly. Others indicate she might have taken a slight detour, perhaps to photograph something that caught her eye or to have a private moment of reflection after the emotional ceremony. What is certain is that when the group reached the trailhead parking area, they realized with growing alarm that Patricia was not among them. Initial concern quickly escalated to fear as calls of her name went unanswered in the forest. The first search began immediately, with members of the hiking party retracing their steps along the trail, calling Patricia's name. As afternoon faded toward evening with no sign of her, authorities were notified, and an official search and rescue operation was mobilized. The Clark County Sheriff's Office coordinated with local search and rescue teams, bringing in trained volunteers familiar with the area. The search area initially focused on the Cold Creek Trail, then expanded to include adjacent paths and surrounding wilderness as the hours passed without any sign of Patricia. Challenging terrain complicated the search efforts. The Gifford-Pinchot National Forest encompasses over 1.3 million acres of wilderness, with dense undergrowth, steep ravines, and numerous waterways. The area where Patricia disappeared features thick forest cover that limits visibility to mere yards in many places, despite searchers being potentially close to their target. Weather conditions initially cooperated with rescue efforts, but as days passed, autumn temperatures dropped, particularly at night. For a 65-year-old woman with limited supplies, surviving multiple nights in these conditions would become increasingly difficult. Search teams were acutely aware of the urgency their mission carried. As the search expanded, additional resources were deployed. Trained search dogs attempted to pick up Patricia's scent along the trails. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras flew overhead, searching for any heat signature that might indicate a person in the wilderness. Experienced trackers examined the soft forest floor for footprints or disturbances that might indicate Patricia's path. Searchers explored multiple theories. Had Patricia taken a wrong turn at a trail junction? Had she fallen and become injured in a location that made her difficult to spot? Had she attempted a shortcut and become disoriented in the similar-looking forest landscape? Each possibility directed different search strategies across the expanding search grid. Patricia's family maintained a constant presence at the Search Command Center, providing details that might help locate her: her hiking habits, physical capabilities, how she might respond if lost. They described a woman who was resourceful and level-headed, qualities that gave searchers hope that she might have found shelter or a way to survive while awaiting rescue. Days stretched into a week with no sign of Patricia. The official search operation grew to include hundreds of volunteers and professionals from multiple counties and agencies. They combed through thousands of acres, checking ravines, creek beds, and dense thickets where a person might be hidden from view. As time passed, the search for Patricia transformed from a rescue operation to a recovery mission, a devastating shift in objective that her family faced with remarkable grace and resolve. Even as official search operations eventually scaled back, family members and dedicated volunteers continued looking, unwilling to leave Patricia alone in the wilderness. Despite one of the most extensive search operations ever conducted in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, Patricia and Krieger was never found. No backpack, no clothing items, no definitive evidence of her path after separating from her hiking companions ever emerged from the dense forest. But the fundamental challenge remains the same: finding one person in an enormous wilderness where nature quickly reclaims all traces of human presence. On February 27, 2015, 18-year-old Dallin Pua set out on what was intended to be an adventure, a hike to one of Hawaii's most infamous destinations, the Haiku Stairs, commonly known as the Stairway to Heaven. This steep, winding staircase of nearly 4,000 steps climbs the side of the Ko'ola mountain range on Oahu, offering breathtaking panoramic views of the island for those who reach the summit. But the beauty conceals danger, and the trail had been officially closed to the public since 1987, a fact that did not deter the adventurous teenager. Dallin had recently graduated from high school, a time of transition and possibility. Friends described him as outgoing and athletic, with a passion for outdoor activities and photography. Like many young locals and tourists alike, he was drawn to the forbidden allure of the Haiku Stairs, a spot infamous for its spectacular vistas and the thrill of accessing a prohibited landmark. The morning of his disappearance, Dallin had been staying at his grandmother's home in Kaneohe. She later recalled their conversation that morning, how she had explicitly warned him against attempting the dangerous hike. "It's illegal," she had told him. "People get hurt up there." Dallin had smiled in that particular way teenagers do when they're acknowledging advice they have no intention of following. Shortly after that conversation, Dallin left the house wearing athletic clothes and carrying a small backpack. He told his grandmother he was meeting friends, but didn't specify who these friends were or confirm his destination. His grandmother's suspicions about his true plans would later prove heartbreakingly accurate. Security cameras from a nearby residence captured Dallin walking alone toward the access point for the Haiku Stairs at approximately 6:30 a.m. He appeared to be moving with purpose, carrying water and what looked like snacks, prepared for a day hike, but not for an extended stay in the mountains. The footage showed him heading toward one of the unofficial entrances that hikers use to bypass security measures. The Haiku Stairs were originally built during World War II to access a naval radio station at the summit. The steep metal staircase clings to the mountainside, climbing nearly 2,800 feet in elevation. Even in good weather, the hike presents significant challenges: narrow passages, steep drop-offs, and sections damaged by landslides and lack of maintenance. When conditions turn wet or windy, as they often do in the mountains of Oahu, the danger increases exponentially. Weather records from February 27, 2015, indicate that the morning began clear, but by midday, cloud cover had descended on the Koolau Range. Periodic light rain showers moved through the area, creating slippery conditions on the metal stairs. Winds at higher elevations were reported to be gusting to 25 miles per hour. Not extreme by Hawaiian standards, but sufficient to create hazardous conditions on exposed sections of the trail. When Dallin failed to return home by evening, his grandmother began calling his friends. None had seen him or had plans to meet him that day. Increasingly concerned, she reported him missing to the Honolulu Police Department. When she mentioned her suspicion that he had attempted to hike the Stairway to Heaven, search efforts quickly focused on the mountains. The search for Dallin presented immediate challenges. The Haiku Stairs and surrounding areas covered difficult terrain: dense vegetation, steep ridgelines, hidden ravines, and nearly vertical drop-offs. The trail itself, while man-made, had fallen into disrepair in certain sections, creating additional hazards for both the missing hiker and those searching for him. Honolulu Fire Department's search and rescue team mobilized at first light the following morning. Helicopters scanned the mountainside and summit while ground teams began the arduous process of checking the stairs and surrounding areas. Given the illegal nature of accessing the stairs, searchers had to consider that Dallin might have taken one of several unofficial approach routes, further complicating the search area. Combing through the densely vegetated mountainside proved extremely difficult. The windward side of the Koolau Range receives abundant rainfall, creating a lush environment where a person, or evidence of their passage, can be quickly obscured by the thick tropical foliage. Ravines that channel water down the mountainside create deep, shadowy areas that are nearly impossible to see from the air and dangerous to access on foot. As days passed without any sign of Dallin, the search expanded beyond the stairs themselves to include adjacent ridgelines and valleys. Experienced hikers familiar with the area volunteered their knowledge of unofficial trails and potential danger zones. Local drone operators offered their equipment to search inaccessible areas. The community rallied around the family, demonstrating the tight-knit nature of island life. Investigators pursued multiple theories. Had Dallin fallen from the stairs in a remote section? Had he attempted to take a shortcut and become lost in the surrounding jungle? Had he reached the summit but taken a wrong turn on his descent? Each possibility directed different search strategies across the expanding search grid. One particular challenge in the investigation was determining if Dallin had been alone or with companions. No witnesses came forward to confirm seeing him on the stairs that day, potentially because other hikers might have been reluctant to admit their own illegal presence on the closed trail. The question of whether someone might have information, but was afraid to come forward, added another layer of complexity to the case. For Dallin's family, the days of searching brought a roller coaster of emotions. Hope when searchers identified areas yet to be checked, despair when those same areas yielded no clues. His grandmother carried the additional burden of their final conversation, the warning unheeded, the smile that now haunted her memories. Despite one of the most intensive search operations conducted on the Koolau Range, no definitive evidence of Dallin's fate emerged from the mountain. No backpack, no camera, no clothing. Nothing that would indicate his path or what might have befallen him during his attempt to reach the stairway to heaven. The official search was eventually scaled back, though family members and volunteers continued their efforts. Flyers with Dallin's image were posted at trailheads throughout Oahu. Social media campaigns sought information from anyone who might have been hiking in the area that day. His case joined those of others who have disappeared in Hawaii's beautiful but unforgiving wilderness. In March 2022, Finn Creaney was preparing for a significant change in his life. At 32, the skilled outdoorsman and bushcraft enthusiast from Scotland was anticipating the arrival of his second child, with his wife already caring for their young daughter. Before his family expanded, Finn planned what was meant to be a refreshing 3-day trek through the Highland wilderness, an environment he knew well and respected. On March 25, 2022, Finn set out from near Loch Naver in Sutherland. His route would take him approximately 18 miles northeast toward Altnahara through some of Scotland's most beautiful and challenging terrain. Before departing, he took a photograph of himself with his distinctive red rucksack against the backdrop of the rolling Highland hills, a final image that would later become painfully significant. An experienced hiker with considerable knowledge of survival techniques, Finn was well prepared for the journey. He had packed his red backpack methodically with camping equipment, food, and the tools he'd need for the 3 days in the wild. His wife expected to hear from him later that day, a check-in that never came. As night fell with no word from Finn, concern began to grow. By the following morning, with still no contact, his family raised the alarm. This silence was completely out of character for a man known to be responsible, especially with his wife pregnant and their second child on the way. The response was swift and comprehensive. Mountain rescue teams from across the region mobilized, including specialists from Assynt and Dundonald. Police Scotland deployed helicopters equipped with thermal imaging technology. Search dogs and trained volunteers combed the rough terrain while drones scanned from above. The local community, understanding the dangers of the Highland wilderness, joined in the efforts to find one of their own. Days into the search, a significant discovery raised more questions than answers. Finn's red backpack was found sitting upright on a rock, approximately 7 miles west of Loch Loyal. Inside were his camping equipment, food, and all his supplies, carefully packed and apparently untouched. The backpack's location was puzzling. It was well off Finn's planned route, with no clear explanation for why he would have diverted so substantially from his intended path. Most concerning of all, there was no sign of Finn himself. No tracks leading away from the backpack, no indication of distress, and no clues as to what might have prompted him to separate from his essential survival gear in such remote territory. For Finn's pregnant wife, waiting at home with their young child, the discovery of the backpack without Finn brought a contradictory mixture of hope and deepening worry. The search intensified, becoming one of the largest mountain rescue operations in the region's recent history. The highland landscape, while breathtakingly beautiful, harbors genuine dangers. Peat bogs can give way without warning. Weather can change dramatically in minutes, bringing fog that disorients even experienced hikers. What appears to be solid ground might hide deep crevices. A person can be just yards from searchers, yet remain completely invisible in the undulating terrain. The formal search eventually scaled back, though it never entirely ceased. Local hikers and outdoor enthusiasts continued to watch for any sign that might help solve the mystery. Online communities dedicated to missing persons kept Finn's story alive, sharing details and possible scenarios. For Finn's family, the lack of answers has meant living in an unresolved state of grief. His children grow older without their father's presence, knowing him only through photographs and stories shared by those who loved him. His wife has had to find strength to move forward while honoring his memory and the love they shared. The case remains open. Mountain rescue teams periodically revisit areas of interest, especially after weather changes that might reveal new evidence. The distinctive red backpack, carefully preserved, continues to be both the most significant clue and the greatest mystery in Finn's disappearance. The Scottish Highlands have claimed many over centuries, some through accident, others through the sheer power of nature's unpredictability. What happened to Finn Creaney on that March day in 2022 remains hidden somewhere in that vast wilderness. His family continues to hope for answers, for the closure that would allow them to fully grieve, and for the return of a beloved husband, father, and son who walked into the hills and never returned.